So John chapter 4, and just a reminder, when we talk about, again, the overall structure of the Gospel of John, we see that in this opening section in chapters 2 through 4, we have four major institutions, four major sources of identity collectively for the people of Israel. So as we looked in the start in 2a, we had the wedding at Cana. We had Jesus drive out the money changers in the temple in chapter 2b. Chapter 3 was a rabbi teacher. That's the dynamic that Jesus and Nicodemus had. And the big takeaway from that one was, as a reminder, the being born again is how it's translated most often. But the Greek word there is actually born from above. And then when we think of the larger context of John chapter 3, then we had a lot of above imagery that points to the way in which God brings salvation. Whether it is in 14 and 15, Jesus calling to mind the lifting up of the serpent from Numbers 21 in the wilderness, and then alluding to his own death where he will be lifted up. So this language from above is how God works. He comes from above down to us, and we look up to him for salvation and life. And now as we move into John chapter 4, we're going to see Jacob's well. So as we begin in verses 1 through 6, I will go ahead and read that for us now. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. So, let's turn to the book of Genesis to familiarize ourselves with the importance of Jacob's well, and specifically the mention of Joseph. So let's turn to the book of Genesis. And we're going to look first in chapter 37.
Raffle ticket I can sell them. There you go.
So we'll start at 37 verse 1. We'll just start with that right now. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that they loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So we're going to stop there for just a moment. One of the things that we will see in the story of Joseph in 37 through 50 is that it's really not actually about the story of Joseph at the end of the day. When you take a look at the larger context of the people of Israel. One of the things that we will see, and as we just think through the end of Genesis, you could think of this actually as the tale of two brothers. So the two brothers that we actually will see that will play out in the larger history of the people of Israel, when you get past the ending of Genesis, is one, Reuben, the oldest, and two, Judah, the fourth-born. And to spoil the ending, although we should all know the ending, we've had this for 4,000 years or so now at this point. Reuben, he starts at the top of the pack by regards to his birthright. He is the firstborn. By the time we get to Genesis chapter 50, it is actually Judah who has ascended to primacy amongst his brothers. And this is why, going forward, Judah becomes the leading tribe for the people of Israel. It is in the tribe of Judah that they build Jerusalem. It is out of the tribe of Judah that we get the Davidic kingship. And it is out of the tribe of Judah that the Messiah will appear. And so in the tale of two brothers, we see Reuben's descent and Judah's ascent, beginning in 37 and culminating in Genesis chapter 50. And although we see a lot of Joseph in that time, one of the things that plays into this interchange in John chapter 4 is Joseph himself and how his story unfolds. And as we continue, let us turn to 37:18 to just get building into our larger point of why we have the interaction we do in John chapter 4. So again, to understand why this institution is so important and why we have the attitudes in some ways that we do in John chapter 4, we have to see why it's important that Joseph is specifically mentioned in connection to this particular well and this piece of land. So 37:18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say a fierce animal had devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and after looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us go to the Ishmaelites, and let not our own hand be upon him, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. So,
Do you know how much 20 shekels was?
a lot,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So they made money on
they did.
it.
So let's continue on to see the reaction. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This is what we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." He identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces." And Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So the story is set up where we see a lot of dereliction of duty across the board. And this is important when we see Jesus then in John chapter 4 in the place of the well that was Jacob's that he dug, that was given to Joseph. We see a restoration of the faithful duty and work of God's Messiah to all members of Israel, both inside and outside what was understood Israel in the time of Christ. So where's the dereliction of duty? Well, let's be honest, Joseph is not exactly a hero. He's not exactly humble with his brothers in his place before his father. Reuben recognizes that things are wrong, but he doesn't actually take a lot of significant action to prevent his brother from being thrown in the pit. And Judah passes the buck. He says, "Well, let's not kill him and have blood on our hands. Let's just get him to a Midianite trader." And it's not exactly a kind time and place to be on a slave mark it, even if one is going down to Egypt. And so as we see the story progress, we all know how things turn out. Joseph is sold, he goes to Potiphar's house, he is very faithful, God blesses him. Potiphar's wife pursues him, he rejects her advances, she lies. And then one of the things that we see in terms of anticipation of the work of Christ is a lot of movement of going down and then being brought back up, symbolizing death and resurrection. So the first movement down that we just read was Joseph going down into the pit and being brought up out of the pit. And then he goes down into Egypt, and then he goes down into the cells at Potiphar's household. And then he is brought up out of the cells. And then he is brought up to being second over the land after his interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams. Meanwhile, Jacob and his family, they are up and then they are brought down to Egypt because of famine. And then they are brought down to their knees in front of Joseph as the treachery is exposed, but also reconciliation takes place. And then they are brought up once again and brought up to the land of Goshen and established as a means of salvation for their family, a place to live with full provision for their needs throughout the course of the famine. And so we see this movement down, death, up, resurrection as the fundamental part of the story to cap off the book of Genesis, which again anticipates Christ in his going down and then his coming back up. To get where we are at by the time we're into the story and to see how things especially turn out for Joseph, I want you to turn to 50 now. And we're going to start in verse 1 and just read the end of this chapter. And as we're reading through Genesis 50, I want you to be very carefully paying attention to how Joseph's story turns out. Could I get a volunteer to read verses 1 through 3 of Genesis 50? 50. Thank you, Richard.
Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days.
All right, so let's just stop there. Do we see embalming as a part of the regular burial rite for the people of Israel anywhere in Genesis or anywhere afterwards? No. This is an Egyptian thing. Now, it's not necessarily disrespectful or sinful, but what does this show us about Joseph at this point in his life?
He's been Egyptian.
He's very Egyptian. And this is important. I want us to have this in mind as we see the rest of the chapter play out. As we continue on, I'll go ahead and read 4 through 14. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear I am about to die. My tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. And Pharaoh answered, Go and bury your father as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as the household of Joseph, his brothers and their father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with them both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. And when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation, and made mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land of Canaanites saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he commanded them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, which Abram bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. So they are in the land of Canaan. They are burying. About to sneeze, it didn't happen, and that's the worst. Now my eye's twitching because I didn't sneeze. So they are in what we now would say is modern day Israel. So they are in the place that God would give to the people of Israel after the Exodus. They are in the promised land. And in many ways, this is the most ornate funeral in the entirety of Scripture. This is the one that has the largest participation across not just Israel, but the world, in a sense. And again, they are heading up, even in death, to the promised land. There is an anticipation of the way in which God will free his people from a fate that is certain, which is death in Egypt, into life which is found in Israel, the promised land. And again, this is accomplished through going beyond the Jordan, crossing through the Jordan. So we're seeing a lot of anticipatory work and locations here in Genesis 50 for God's larger plan for the people of Israel. Any questions or comments on this so far?
I was thinking of the parallel that they sold him for a certain amount of money, just like Christ was portrayed for a certain amount.
Yeah, there is a lot of anticipatory things that we can look at in a variety of different spots. Continuing on though, verse 15, could I get a volunteer to read 15 through the end of the chapter? Okay, thank you.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him." So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, "Before your father died, he commanded, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespasses of your brothers and their sins, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the Lord God your father." And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face and said, "Behold, we are your servants." And Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Oh, all the way down?
Yes, all the way through,
Okay.
yeah.
So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up to Joseph's knee. And Joseph said to his brethren, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt.
So when we see the people of Israel later on establish themselves after the Exodus, is there a tribe of Joseph? No, there isn't. He is not counted among the 12 tribes of Israel. He is on the outside looking in from that perspective. However, does Joseph have land within the 12 tribes? Yes, and we see that in John chapter 4. And this is incredibly important for us to note and to remember, to see part of the tension that is built into the setup in John chapter 4 between Jesus and this Samaritan woman. We can't underestimate how significant it is that Joseph was brought up during the Exodus and buried according to his wishes, and foretold the promises of God but he is still buried in Egypt, or he's put in a coffin in Egypt. He is embalmed, he has an Egyptian wife. He generally has an Egyptian identity, which makes sense given how much time he spent there, even if he never lost sight of where the ultimate hope in life for himself will be, which is in Israel, which is with his family, which is headed by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so for us, what does that tell us then about how this land is viewed in John chapter 4? Well, it gives a lot more context then to why there is such a discrepancy between the people of Samaria in many ways, especially in this particular plot of land, and the people of Israel. Samaritans are seen as outsiders for a variety of reasons, not the least of which people in this area have the double outsiderness of one not being in any sort of formally 12-tribe territory, but also, two, seeing something that is connected to Joseph, who was a part of Egypt through his death, and it wasn't until afterwards that he was brought back home, but never included as a part of the 12 tribes. There is this sense of separation that is there for Joseph and his descendants, not in terms of salvation, per se, but in terms of identity and how that is formed, and what it means to be children of Abraham, which is a question that occurs in a variety of spots in the gospel. What does it mean to be a child of Abraham? What does it mean to be a member of the people of Israel? And after a while, the thing that is to be a child of Abraham, instead of becoming very expansive, centered around faith and trust in the promises of God that he gave to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and trust in God in his fulfillment of the covenant, it became very narrow. And not only did it become narrow in terms of just the 12 tribes and his physical descendants, but even abandoning sort of that northern part of Israel that split off after the death of Solomon and was conquered first, and then decided that they were not going to worship in Jerusalem in the same fashion that the people in the south were. So you have these layers of separation that are building to where we get now in John chapter 4, we see this woman of Samaria who is in near this well that is of Jacob, which is important because Jacob is important, but it is in the land that was given to Joseph, who was in many ways outside of his brothers until well after his death. 400 years, in fact, because if you remember, Joseph's bones are not carried out of Egypt until the Exodus, which is 400 years later. Do you see how then all of these different layers that were laid here in Genesis 37 through 50 now are starting to build up a solid picture of why we see some of this tremendous separation between Samaria and Israel, and especially for those who are gathered around this specific place. That shows that God is there and working, but not in that narrower way that the people of Israel had come to see and perceive what it means to be a child, in a sense of God. I mean, of Abraham, but there was a tremendous separation. Any questions or comments on that? I think all of that background is important to understand this interchange that will come out of this. Any questions or comments, though, on that? Are we all tracking? I know it's kind of a lot, but...
I have a question, and
Yes.
it's not really, it's a little side one. Did the brothers tell the truth when they said that their father said that Joseph should forgive them? Or
Yeah.
is something they made up?
I think they were telling the truth there.
I'm just wondering if they
Yeah.
lied so much. Just
Dad said.
Any other questions? This is a good one, but I think they were telling the truth there.
Okay.
Yes?
I don't know how much this is related to it, but as far as, yes or no, as far as I understand, like the Samaritans were those people that the Assyrians had sent back in the book of 2 Kings, I think, and then I know in Maccabees they're talked about when they're warring with the tribe of Judah and all that. So is it where is that obvious, I think it ties into John 4, because obviously the Jews hate Samaritans, right, according to the text. Why, like the people of Judah, right, throughout the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, it seems like there's such a struggle against apostasy. And even in Maccabees, right,
Yeah.
resisting Hellenization and of Alexander's descendants, and it's like, but it seems like when Jesus is on the scene here, it seems like, you know, the Jews are finally, like, the religious leaders are finally at a point where they are like so, you know, according to them, they're on the straight and narrow path. They don't really seem to wrestle with this idolatry anymore, you know, like worshiping the gods of the Canaanites and stuff. And why is that, do you think, you know? It seems like there's just, in the Old Testament, there's so much apostasy, and then all of a sudden they're now at a point where it's like they feel like they are really honoring the God of their father.
So I'll put it in this analogy. It's like what happens on the playground at the school sometimes, where if there's a dispute and the kid is recounting all the events, they just selectively forget their role in the situation. You know, that they did nothing wrong. They don't remember doing anything wrong. And it's almost kind of like that. And part of why they have this sort of almost selective memory come about is because the temple is rebuilt. And it is the only places where sacrifices can be made. And really that separation between the northern kingdom of Samaria and Israel, even before the exile, was very pronounced because there was a definitive push by Samaria to worship only in the north and to have some of those other spots that became important as places to offer sacrifice instead of the temple. And the southern kingdom would then use the temple as a cudgel to try to enforce their will and their prestige in the situation. And then that too then becomes a significant issue because the temple then is not a place of true worship where one is offering sacrifices and receiving the forgiveness of God, but rather is another either political or cultural tool to assert one's supremacy. In the case, you know, we believe better in the south because we still worship in the temple. And the northern kingdom is we believe better because we are being faithful to these other places that was given to our forefathers, like this well in John chapter 4.
And she says that, the woman says,
Exactly.
Yeah, our fathers worshipped at Mount Gerizim, but
Yeah.
you say that worship is only acceptable in Jerusalem. So.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where some of that developed long before either north or south went into exile in the Old Testament.
Judah destroyed some of the Sumerian sites.
Yes.
They're not exactly innocent.
No, and that gets the whole point of a lot of these servant references, for example, in the book of Isaiah, where you have a lot of references of servants who fail to do their duty. And God's not talking about the pagan nations around Israel. God's talking about the leadership, both religious and political, of Israel, of both north and south kingdom, that have failed in their task to receive God and His work and be faithful to His covenant, but instead follow their own will and way. And this is why then the contrast of the perfect servant, like we heard on Good Friday in Isaiah 52 and 53, who should be high and lifted up, again another one of those born from above moments, then becomes such a clear and sharp dynamic of how God's people have acted of old versus God's future servant and His Messiah working perfectly and faithfully over and against the unfaithfulness of what came before. Any other questions or comments? If not, let's turn back to John 4. We're going to pick up in verse 7. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For His disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for me a drink, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it from himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." So, as we've been talking about, we know why there's surprise here and why John includes that little tag for Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. These, again, are deep-rooted issues that have their roots in some ways going all the way back, yes, even as we talked about at the beginning of class here, to Genesis 37 through 50. And the fact that this well is on Joseph's land. Joseph was never a part of the 12 tribes. Joseph remained in Egypt through his death, and it wasn't until 400 years afterward that his bones were brought up and buried. And not only that, Samaria then refused to worship the temple in Jerusalem. And I think there was a bit of confusion of how salvation is given by God. Again, I think it's very clear and not uncharitable of me to say, for many in the people of Israel, by the time we pick up in that first century there, their view of salvation depended on the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the physical connection to the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus is already starting to address this in John chapter 3. How does he tell Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, one who was well respected at that, who was very well inculcated into this perspective in life, how does he tell Nicodemus that he needs to worship? Spirit and in truth. So it's not just tied to the physical place and physical work, although that is important. And we see the physical nature of God's work and in Jesus' signs and miracles that he does. But it's not because you're physically descended from Abraham that you are a child of Israel. Because as we hear told in scriptures, out of what can God make children of Abraham? Out of these rocks, out of these stones I can raise up children of Abraham. And this is where, for us, this living water is going to be not connected to merely just the historical life and procession of history that led up to Israel being where it's at, but it reverts back to what it's always been from the beginning. Faith being credited to people as righteousness, whether it's Abraham's faith, Jacob's faith, Isaac's faith, etc. All of that is what is credited as righteousness, even from the very beginning. Salvation doesn't change between Old and New Testament. It's still God's work for you outside of us that brings salvation in life. Because was there anything special about Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or the people of Israel that God would set them apart to be his people? No. No, God's